Hello and welcome back to another episode of You Want to Do What with Dan and Julie. Today we have Ben on, who is a motorsport engineer. Hi Ben, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
All good. It's a bit hot, but we're all good.
Good, yes. Likewise here.
Do you want to tell the listeners a bit about what you actually do, Ben?
Okay, yeah. So I class myself as a motorsport engineer. Sort of that definition is actually pretty broad. I think most people, if they think race engineer, motorsport engineers, they probably would default to Formula One and those guys on the pit wall. So that is I do very much a similar thing, but in a form of motorsport called GT and tin top racing, which in many ways is probably a bigger area of motorsport, but it's the difference is Formula One is like a bespoke, we call them tubs like that, the sort of little single seater thing which has no resemblance to anything you'd see on the road, whereas what I sort of specialise in is race cars which are based off of a road car in some way.
Mm-hmm. And you specialise in the analytics of sort of looking at performance, right? Yeah,
that's it. So the motorsport is pretty close to market leader in terms of driving technology. So we sort of heavily use electronics and data logging now. So I've sort of found my way into somehow being a bit of a specialist in analysing log data in particular and using electronic control systems to improve performance of both man and machine.
So why did you choose that industry? Have you always been into cars, and were you tuning cars from like as soon as you could, or?
Yeah, so because I think like most are pretty brainwashed by parents, in particular my dad when I was a kid. Just found motorsport so exciting. So I know Dan through running into other people playing rugby, but that's a pretty good buzz. But until you get someone to take you around in the track in a proper race car, not just you get track prepared road cars, which we think are fast every day, but you go out in a proper race car and it's another step again, and found it so exciting and basically hooked. So it's certainly a passion job and a passion lifestyle.
So what was your sort of school life and your education to become a motorsports engineer?
So it's all I've ever done. I've never worked in a McDonald's or never served tables, all the sort of the little things you would do as you're growing up and just doing whatever you can to earn money. I realised I wanted to do it probably 14, 15, something like that.
Oh, that's young.
Yeah, it was pretty early on. I decided that's what I wanted to do. So then I focused my career around that, really. So I didn't do the conventional A-levels. I went and got what's called a BTEC National Diploma, a college course, specialised in motorsport engineering. And then from that, got offered a place at university and done a Bachelor's of Engineering degree, specialised in motorsport engineering again. And then, a career off the back of that, straight into motorsport.
And what was engineering at university like regarding motorsport? Do you find it helped?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's such a niche thing. I actually, before and during my education, I was working hands-on building. I started off building race engines. Very fortunate that the little to live, there was a very high-level professional engine builder, which I could. So I was riding my bike to his place before I even could have a car. So that was my work placement at school. I think it's year 11. You do a 2-week work placement. I managed to get in down there, and then he kept me on after that, just doing Saturday jobs. And then the college course was sort of you only done 2 or 3 days a week, but really long days. And then I spent 2 days working in industry, sort of just gaining as much experience as I could. So definitely think you need the hands-on appreciation of everything that goes on in a car to be a good engineer, where sort of nowadays an engineer is more laptop based and strategy based and numbers based. You still got to have appreciation of physically what's going on in the car and the guys that work on it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think majority of uni courses are a little bit more theoretical and lecture lab sort of thing. Whereas obviously for being a motorsports engineer, you need to get in with the car and understand it a little bit more. So did you find you actually did much of that at university?
No, I think my engineering course was at University of Hertfordshire, which for the first and second year is pretty much just a general broad engineering degree. You have one or two modules where you specialise or sort of have motorsport themes to them, but in essence, it would be very similar to any other engineering degree. I would.
It's a mechanical engineering degree sort of thing.
Yeah, we shared a lot of modules specifically with aviation.
Okay.
But yeah, the math side of it, in particular, was just general engineering mathematics, and then there's an extracurricular thing called a Formula Student, which sort of is the go-to breeding ground of young motorsport engineers.
What was the Formula Student?
So it's a competition amongst all the universities, or not say all, but most engineering universities in the world, where you design, build, develop, and race your own single-seater race car.
Wow, that sounds epic.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a lot of hard work. I mean, they use what's called an air restrictor to limit the amount of engine power you can make, because it's driven by students.
I think it's a very big rule book, isn't it, for each year that comes out?
They're huge, like 0 to 60 times really impressive, but you're not getting to not realistically kill yourself speeds, because there isn't enough engine power, but they're sort of 200 kilos and 50, 60 horsepower. So the power to weight ratio is actually really, really decent. But yeah, so there's all forms of motorsport associated with that. So you've got to firstly raise the funds, which is still the biggest thing in no matter what level of motorsport you compete at. Then you've got all the design work. You've got to collaborate as a team, because when you start from a blank sheet of paper, you don't really know what's going to hit what and stuff like that, where my friend's designing a suspension part here, but I've got an engine part here, trying to share the same space. It's all got to be collaborated to make sure everything works in harmony. So that's really cool. And then once you decided on the design, you've then physically got to make it. So yeah, you pick up. I've never welded before I'd gone to university, so I got taught how to do that. There's all sorts of cool things that come out of it, and that really was for me the one of the most beneficial things I would say for anyone going to university. If you've got an interest in motorsport, I would make sure you do that.
I think I'd also say for anyone in engineering in general, or you don't even have to be in engineering, art degrees or anything, I'd definitely say get involved with the Formula Student project. It is great.
So it's a big commitment. We were doing breakfast, lunch and dinner at university, go home, get 5-6 hours sleep and go back and do it again. So you end up, you design it throughout your year, but most of the hard work comes once your second semester's worth of exams are done, and then you fully commit yourself to the project.
You must have loved that, though. That must have been a bit of a taste of what you were in for in the real sort of, motorsport world.
Yes and no. I think I was very fortunate in that I'd had a great deal of experience before I got to that stage, which most people wouldn't. If you'd done the conventional route of school, A levels, college, university, it doesn't leave that much time to get hands-on experience. But I was fortunate that I had a facility where I could have in my town, if that makes sense. So I count myself very lucky there. So I already had a bit of a flavour for it, and I knew what was good and knew what wasn't so good. So I felt like I was probably more of a contributor to my team, sort of a bit more of a leading role, I think, because I had the experience. But likewise, I still learned an awful lot doing it. And I say, if you're not as lucky to me to have a high-class facility so close to home, it will be a huge benefit to you. And say I chose my university off of its recent performances in the Formula Student competition. there's sort of 2 or 3 in the UK that do very well every year. So I didn't look at any other sort of performance metrics other than that. So I count it very highly in terms of choosing where to get your education. And I know Ross Brawn in particular, he's sort of the famous F1 chief, and now he's technical, some sort of manager in F1. He would only take graduates onto any F1 team he's been involved with if they had done Formula Student.
Yeah, wow.
So, yeah, I would, if anyone's looking to go the motorsport engineering route, I would sort of make that a priority as part of your.
And how did you do?
We did okay. I think we were 2nd in the UK my year.
Okay.
So it wasn't bad.
That's
Pretty
too bad.
Good, mate.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I say the Germans. There's some German teams now in particular that are, like, in terms of technology used, they are cut above the rest. But they have ties with a lot of the German manufacturers and have budgets of 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 plus is the rumor. Whereas I think what we raised was around 26,000.
Oh wow!
So we weren't on the same playing field with them, but I think with the amount of money and resource we had, we did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And the competition is set up so you don't buy success necessarily. It is the rules are set with a budget in mind. So yeah, don't get put off by if you're not going to university with the highest of budgets that you're set out for failure at the beginning, because it's not like that at all. It's very fair.
You've done quite a lot of different bits and bobs within your career already. Worked on different projects and for different teams. Like saw you worked on a bit of Bentley and McLaren. How important is it to sort of network once you get in the industry to get these opportunities and to specialise, I guess, as well, is what you've done?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. So there's two main routes in motorsport engineering. I only know the GT pin top road car based side, which is huge. It's now becoming, young racing drivers used to aspire to be Formula One drivers, but I'm seeing the tide shift where if you want to be a professional racing driver, you probably want to get into GT racing, because you've got the likes of Mercedes, Porsche, Bentley, Ferrari. All these people are heavily involved and have a huge manufacturer presence. So yeah, I only know this side of the industry, so I'll only comment on that side. But it's actually a very small network of people comparatively. It's a hugely demanding job, and it takes a sort of special sort of mindset to put up with it. So there's at the moment simply there's not enough engineers to go around for the amount of work there is. So it's weird. I was involved in the World Championship and the European Championship and done a lot in the Middle East. And no matter where I went in the world, you turn up and you go, wow, I know him, I know him, I know him. What are you doing out here? It's incestuous is probably the word.
Yeah. I suppose it's not a bad thing for you if you can sort of meet and chat to these people. Once you're in kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's hugely reputational based. So that's a good a point as it is bad. So you don't get away with too many bad performances or any wrongdoings, because everyone soon knows about it. Likewise, if you're good at your job, there's work coming out your ears, and it's sort of up to you as to how much you commit to. So, and I think that's one of its charms. I think you've got to be a competitive person to want to do it.
Mm. And what's sort of an average day for you then? You said you go around and you're doing a lot of traveling, and I guess you have to travel around a load of different circuits around the UK as well. Yeah, so I think 2018 was my busiest year to date, where I'd done 2 British Championships and a World Championship. That was just three different cars, 3 different programs. There'd be 7 or 8 race weekends in total per program. I tallied it up at the end of the year, and I'd done 195 nights away in hotels and 47 flights.
So travel's involved.
So you've got to be able to travel, and you've got to be able to basically get a good night's sleep whenever you get a chance. If you're not a good sleeper, if you're in a new environment, you're going to struggle. So my typical, if I'm working, which I consider work to be at a racetrack, it would be, so we preheat the tyres in GT racing. We call it a tyre oven, where we get them to sort of 80, 90 degrees Celsius before they even get bolted on the car.
Wow.
So imagine there's a bit of time to get the oven fired up, get it hot, and then get the tyres up to temperature. So say we're out the first session of the day, which is normally 9 o'clock, you would have to be at the circuit for probably 6:45, 7 o'clock in the morning, just to set your tyre pressures and get all the tyres in the oven getting hot. Say most days normally finish on track running between 5:30 and 6 p.m. You wouldn't run all day, but you say you've got to be on the job all day. And then there's normally a debrief, an hour and two's worth of data analysis to come out of the debrief, any plans for the next day, what you're going to change, what you're going to tweak, what you're going to tune. And if that goes to plan, you're probably looking at sort of 8:30, 9 p.m. finish. Yeah, and that's without any crash damage as well. If you've obviously crashes happen a lot, and it's a huge team effort to fix it, and you can't miss sessions. So it's quite regularly you do an all-nighter if something hasn't gone well. So yeah, it's pretty demanding lifestyle.
And is this what you did straight out of uni? Got straight into doing these sort of this job working on GT motorsport?
Yes and no. So I think the most common route, I count myself as very lucky to be directly involved in the team running a car. The more common, because the budgets involved now are just silly. They're huge. I think the cheapest thing I'll do this year is probably £400,000 a season, what it costs to do. So imagine if you're paying that sort of money, you don't take on someone inexperienced to run your program to waste your money. So you've got to, it's a chicken and the egg situation where you've got to get experience to prove yourself, but how do you get experience in the first place? So what most people do is go and work for a manufacturer or a supplier. So yeah, you might go and work for Bentley themselves, or you might go and work for, I don't know, AP Racing, which are big in the brake side of things, or Cosworth, which are big for engines and stuff. And I got a job with Cosworth out of university. So I mentioned that they're sort of probably world famous engine manufacturer, but they've actually got an electronics department as well, which sort of shaped my career to becoming a specialist in electronics and data analysis. And that was, I had quite a broad interest when I left university, and it's just apply for as many job positions as you can get. Unfortunately, that one sort of said yes. So that sort of focused my career at that point. So when you're a supplier like that, you're not directly involved for any one car. You normally for a whole grid of cars or a whole brand of cars. It's similar work in terms of support. Yeah, if someone crashes a car, you're not normally expected to stay there overnight to repair it as part of that team. So that can be slightly more easygoing in terms of the hours.
What sort of personality traits do you see in yourself and others in the job around you?
The overwhelming factor is this can-do attitude. It's a problem-solving attitude. Every day you're already on the limit of control with everything you do in terms of, it was just a car and track, but now if you do GT racing where there's many pit stops and strategies going on, the whole team is now got to be at the best they can be at the moment. So you've constantly got to want to improve yourself and improve your performance. So you've got to, whatever challenge is put in front of you, you've got to quickly make a decision and adapt and overcome it and do the best you can. So yeah, you've got to be good under pressure.
I suppose you've got to be confident as well to be able to sort of talk up for your opinion point, especially if you're doing statistics and you say, well, we need to be doing this, we're currently doing that.
Yeah, you've got to have confidence in your abilities and say there's an awful lot of money riding on some of the decisions that you make. Once you've made them, you've got to back them basically, and you've got a big confident in your decision process to get to whatever decision you need. So that just comes with experience. And fortunately, most of the bigger teams will take on a junior engineer to work alongside an experienced one. So you can sort of come up with your own decisions whilst you're junior and present them to the more experienced person, and they'll either analyse it and go, yeah, it's a good idea, I haven't thought of that, or I've seen this before, it sounds good, but the negatives of this and this is why we wouldn't do it. So you're not directly loaded with a load of responsibility, but there's still that responsibility there. So the confidence side of it is definitely important.
What are some of the biggest positives and opportunities you've taken from your career so far? I mean, you knew you wanted to do this since you were 14, so I guess that's one of the big positives. You're doing something you love, but anything else?
Yeah, so it's such a passion sport. You're working with only like-minded individuals, so you make a huge network, huge teams. It's actually once you're into the professional world, it's quite small. So what 1 year you could be, it's my version of football or my version of rugby in terms of what I follow, and the drivers are some of my heroes, you know what I mean? So it's 1 year you could be following and watching on TV and go, cool, he's cool. And then the next year be working directly with him and helping to shape the races that you sort of dreamed about as a kid. I don't know when this is going out, but this weekend is sort of the world famous Le Mans 24-hour race. And in 2017, I went there as a spectator with my dad going, this is really cool. And then the next year I'm working it, directly involved with the race and having an impact on its outcome. And so that's a pinch yourself moment right there, definitely. So the other thing I've sort of definitely worth mentioning is how inclusive it all is. I think more than ever, inclusivity is talked about, and yes, it's got many flaws in the motorsport industry, but the fact of the matter is everyone wants to go fast. So if you can make that car go faster than anyone else, you're in. It doesn't sort of matter on gender, race, wealth, any of those factors. If you're good enough to make that car go faster, you're accommodated. So very single-minded, which is, I think, more positive than the negative is.
Yes, no, certainly. And what would be some of the less favourable aspects you find about the job or the industry?
There's definitely the commitment side of things. So you can't say if there's only 6 or 7 races in a championship, and your mate says, "Oh, I'm getting married on March the 1st. I'd love for you to be there." You go, "Oh, that's a race weekend clash." You can't just say, "Sorry, team, I can only do 6 out of 7," because that doesn't cut it. You have to be committed for the whole program. So you either do the whole season with them or not, if that makes sense. So your social life is based around your work calendar. Likewise, the sheer amount of hours you do when you're doing it can get pretty tiring. So an awful lot of travels. You live out of a suitcase. I net, if you compared someone that works a normal automotive engineering job, they probably work 210, 220 days a year. You can make a good living, as good, if not better, than you would have working for, say, I don't know, Ford road cars as a comparative, and maybe only work 170 days a year. So you're either full on working, or you have a lot of downtime in between the races, especially over winter. So
we actually looked at some stats for sort of average salaries for motorsport engineers, and starting salaries seem to be from around 18 to up to 25 grand. But then with a few years experience, it can go right up to 40 to 60,000. Does that sort of sit right with you and your experiences?
Yeah, so I think probably one thing I haven't touched on yet is the sort of the nature of the industry. So certainly my GT side is nearly every engineer I work with is actually self-employed. So as we don't physically work on the cars, it's not necessary for us to be there at the workshop in between races. So it saves the teams a load of money. They don't want to be employing an engineer to sit around and actually only be effective when the car's at track or on a race weekend, which is typically only 80, 90 days a year, if that makes sense. So it's all day rate based.
Okay.
Sort of in the industry, what I do. So you work as much or as little as you want. So it's a pretty relentless lifestyle. So what you find is the older the guys get, the more experience the guys if you were paying the entrance fee, the guy you'd want working in your team gets more tired, more family commitments, wants to do less days away. So they ended up charging a huge amount of money per day just to sort of cover the year, get the same year's earnings, if that makes sense. So there's a huge spread in what you can earn. Whereas those figures, what you quoted, would be if you worked directly for a company, I think, which should most likely be a manufacturer or a parts supplier. I think that the upper end's about right if you're really high level sort of management at a manufacturer. But if you go self-employed, and the track support route work. So I know people earn a lot more money than that, and earn a lot less as well. It depends how much you want to depends how much you want to work, really.
Obviously, majority of that is based on experience more than anything.
So yeah, if your one goal is in life, so most people see the Le Mans 24-hour as the motorsport equivalent of the World Cup football final or the Rugby World Cup final or your Wimbledon Grand Slam. It's pretty much the only sport in the world where you can be at the highest level later on in life, and with enough money you can buy your way onto the grid.
Right, okay.
So it's not like if you've always been a football fan, you have a bit of business success and you're mid-45, you're sat on 100 million, and you could never buy your way into a World Cup football final, could you? Whereas you can effectively do that in motorsport. If you have got someone in your team that you trust and you've got that sort of money behind you, money's no object to get someone in your team, really. So I know some engineers that have earned an awful lot of money.
What would be something that's not in the job description that you have to deal with?
Probably traveling around the world, sharing hotels with someone you haven't necessarily met before. I've turned up. I worked for a German team in 2018, and sort of the first event I went out to is the first time I properly met them. And you're sharing a twin room with a German guy you've never met before. That catches you off guard. But it's pretty. Once you get into it, it's pretty much sort of copy repeat. Once you get up and running, it's such a well honed, fine tuned process most people go through now, because it is the fastest and people have worked that out over a number of years. You do the same job each racetrack you go to, and you just tune to the conditions you're presented with. So there's nothing too surprising there. But you hadn't thought about probably the travelling side of it and where you stay and where you go for dinner and all this sort of thing.
But you've sort of done this for, I don't know, 5 or so years at the level you're working at now, and you also started Motorsport Performance Solutions, right? That focuses on the analytics side of the business. Yeah.
So as I mentioned previously, most of it is contract work. So I had to I started the company out of necessity, really, just so I could contract to race teams. But you got to realise what your niche is in this game, because there's quite a few roles, quite a few varied responsibilities, and having worked. So everyone's heard of Bosch, I would assume, just from even domestic appliances. They're on par with the biggest motorsport electronics company in the world, and I think a lot would say Cosworth Electronics are on a similar playing field. So it's not a hotly contested marketplace, and I was fortunate enough to work with one of the world leaders in it. So it sort of made sense for me to carry on down that route and specialise in it. And I could either learn to be average at something, another area, or I could play on the fact that I've worked for one of the world leaders. So that's why I chose data analytics and control systems, which is actually hugely fascinating. It's relatively immature as technology found in a race car, whereas engine technology, suspension technology, brake technology is, yes, it's still improving, but the development rate has slowed considerably probably in the last 15, 20 years, whereas the electronics is only just finding its feet. So it's very exciting to be a lot of the things we do. You're being the first one in the world or existence to be doing it, if that makes sense.
So what do you see as the future of the industry you're working? You said earlier that kids now growing up want to be race car drivers. They don't necessarily want to go into F1. They want to go into what you're doing. And how does, I guess, environmental impacts affect what you're doing now? Are people being more considerate about that as well?
Yeah, I definitely think there's much more conscious effort towards that, the environmental side. I think ultimately what needs the motorsport industry is the road car manufacturers now. So your Porsches, your Mercedes, your Ferraris. It always used to be sort of a bit of a saying, you could win on Sunday, sell on Monday. It's always been an advertising activity for these manufacturers. But also I think the technology we find in everyday road cars now is hugely developed in the motorsport environment. So there'll be stuff I'm working on now or say me and my colleagues in the professional motorsport industry, that will 5 years down the line be commonplace technology in road cars. So sort of that's the way you don't get a harsher environment, I don't think, than motorsport. So
yeah, I suppose it's sort of, in engineering, I've always found it sort of trickles down from like the military and then into professional competitive sports and then into everyday life, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I think motorsport will always in some form or another always exist, and it'll just be dictated by the technologies the big OEM companies want to develop. And so I'm looking at electrification and sort of e-motorsport, but sort of the more you look into it, I don't think my understanding of it, I'm not by no means an expert, but I don't think the battery technology we currently have is likely to be the future.
Okay.
So I actually think engines will be around longer than we think, is my understanding of it. So I think there's still a good few years yet if you're interested in engines. But yeah, so I think it'll always be there. It's always a proving ground. It's always a way to make new technology cool. Say manufacturers use electronic race cars first, and then they did that long before they actually started selling electric road cars. It's sort of a way of sexing up new technology, so to speak. The competitive environment just breeds technological advance, so
definitely
it'll always be there. But we'll just have to as members of the motorsport community, you just have to adapt and learn to whatever technology a manufacturer's trying to develop or use going forwards. So,
would you still go into the industry knowing what all you know now?
Yes, definitely. I think it's to work the amount I work. I think there's probably a shelf life on it. Say if you want to do the more conventional, have a wife, have kids, raise a family, you spend too much time away. So you've either got to have a very, very understanding spouse, or say you charge a huge amount of money to do a relatively little amount of work, which
sounds like the dream.
Obviously that is a dream, but you've got to be realistic with how many opportunities there realistically are. So I think I know quite a few people that do it for sort of 10 years, scratch the itch, so to speak, and then fall out into wider automotive engineering or other engineering roles where you get a much more conventional 9-to-5 family life. So
do you think that'll be a move you'll make eventually, or do you think you like the circuit too much?
So I can't see me ever getting out of it completely. I'm actively working on ways to, and especially with the coronavirus, it's a bit of a wake-up call in that I was dependent on traveling to a race circuit to earn my money. So as soon as you couldn't do that, that's a bit of a wake-up call. So if you've got another means to use your experience and expertise to provide another form of income, then it's always going to be a benefit. So I'm actually actively looking to sell products now. So the electronic products I work with at the professional level, I'm sort of making business plans to start selling at a more amateur level, which would sort of be sort of an amateur level I define as someone that just does it as a hobby. So I know plenty of car nut people where they do what's called track days, where you just pay some money to take your road car on the track for the day, but they'll take that pretty seriously. So although it's considered amateur, even now the technology in that industry is ever increasing. So I think there's plenty of opportunities out there, and there's plenty of very good, experienced and established race engineers that now find themselves tuning road cars and sporting amateurs, which is a much less consuming schedule, should we say.
Well, it sounds like a brilliant job. I'd love to do that. Go around race cars and watch the races, and it sounds brilliant, mate. Thank you so much for coming on. No worries. No, thanks for having me. I have to say, I listened to a few of your other podcasts earlier in preparation for this, and I thought it was really good. I think it's much needed service that not many people do. So cheers for that. That's what you've done. Thanks, mate. Where can people find you on social media? So I've got an Instagram account and a Facebook account, sort of. So it's Motorsport Performance Solutions. I've got a website. Most of my work was through word of mouth previously. So it's people, I didn't have to do much self promotion, but as of
as of the lockdown, I've invested a bit of time and money into making my online presence much greater. So much bigger, there'll be much more content. There'll be lots more exciting information. So
well, you sent your business plan over earlier today and a little read through, and I'd say, mate, I think it's a great idea, a bit of an untapped market, and the plan looks good. So best of luck with all that, and thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
No, thanks for having me, guys. Cheers,
Ben.